Hello and welcome to Life at PALS. Today we will go over another GED science practice paper. And I hope you will learn something new. And if you want to attempt the questions at your own pace, you can pause the video during the questions and then listen to the answer afterwards. So we start now. First question, energy transfer as heat between two objects depends on which of the following. The difference in mass of the two objects, the difference in volume of the two objects, the difference in temperature of the two objects, or the difference in composition of the two objects. Now the correct answer here is C, because heat always flows from higher to lower temperature. Mass or volume don't really have to do anything with the direction, the transfer of heat from one place to another, so it's always from high to low temperature. So it depends on the temperature. The energy transfer as heat is always directed from an object at, okay, we just answered this, high temperature to an object at low or lower, higher, lower, low, high, low. Fine, I guess. Temperature. You are aware that Earth rotates and makes one complete rotation every day, but did you know that the Sun also rotates? Scientists observed this by marking the position of sunspots, which appear dark. By tracking the movement of the sunspot, scientists can measure the rotation of the Sun. Different parts of the Sun actually rotate at different paces. At its equator, the Sun rotates once every 25 days, Earth days, and at its poles, it rotates every 36 days. In a complete Earth year, approximately how many times will the Sun rotate at its equator? So this is a relatively simple calculation that we have to do here. So we know that it takes about 25 Earth days to rotate at the equator. So we know that a year has 365 days. We divide this by 25 and approximately that should be around 15 times. Yeah, 10 times is 250, 12 times 300, 14 times 350, and then plus 15. We round to 15 rotations, so the answer is B here. The Sun is orbited by how many planets? Or 8 planets, 2 asteroids, 1 dwarf planet. So there are way more asteroids, millions of asteroids in our solar system. There are definitely more than 1 dwarf planet, and the correct answer is therefore 8 planets. From closest to the Sun to furthest away, we have Mercury, then Venus, then Earth, then Mars, then Jupiter, then Saturn, then Uranus and Neptune. It should be 8, so I didn't forget it. Okay. Question 5 refers to the following passage. The human body is an excellent example of coordination between organ systems. Each and every organ system works in perfect harmony with other systems to ensure the smooth functioning of the entire body. For example, human cells require oxygen to carry out metabolic activities. Cells break down food in the presence of oxygen to release energy and carbon dioxide. The air breathed in reaches the lungs. From there, the pulmonary veins absorb a part of the oxygen and carry the oxygen-rich blood to the heart. The heart then pumps the blood through the body, where the oxygen is absorbed and carbon dioxide is released back into the blood vessels. This blood is carried back to the lungs, from which the carbon dioxide is released back to the air when the person breathes out. The example in this passage shows coordination between which two body systems? That should be definitely the respiratory system. It's about breathing, and the lungs, that is the respiratory. So one is respiratory system, and it is as well about the blood vessels, the heart, and this second system is the circulatory system, or sometimes as well called the cardio, referring to the heart, vascular, referring to the blood vessels. Mercury in glass thermometers work on the principle of volumetric expansion, which is the most materials expand as they get warmer. The common glass thermometer contains liquid mercury that rises upwards in a glass tube as the temperature of the thermometer rises. The liquid moves up the tube for which of the following reasons? So we are told about quite a lot of important information here. So mercury in glass thermometer work on the principle of volumetric expansion, which is that most materials expand as they get warmer. Only the glass contracts as the temperature decreases, so the liquid mercury moves up the tube to occupy most of the tube expansion space. Now, while both the glass and the liquid mercury contract as the temperature increases, that is wrong. As temperature increases, materials expand. So here it says contracting is the opposite of expanding. So contracting and rise in temperature is a contradiction. The pressure of gas above the liquid mercury decreases as its temperature rises. That is contradiction as well. Usually the pressure of a gas increases as temperature rises. Pressure of gas decreases as temperature rises, so that doesn't make sense. While both the glass and the liquid mercury expand as the temperatures increase, the liquid mercury expands more rapidly than the glass does, and therefore the mercury rises up the glass tube on the inside of the thermometer. That makes sense. 7. The DNA of the 3 species of plants is sequenced using gel electrophoresis, which is very similar to paper chromatography. So it's a kind of chromatography method. The results of the process show the following. So we see the DNA being split up here. Which of the 2 species are most closely related? That would be the ones that have most overlapping DNA pieces and genes, and we can see that this overlaps, and this overlaps. So here we have 3 overlapping, whereas species C has only this one overlapping, and here we have the second one overlapping with the first and the third one, but that's it. So A and B have 3 overlapping genes or fragments of DNA, therefore they should be most closely related to each other, so the correct answer is A. Number 8, the following diagram shows 2 types of bacteria being exposed to an antibiotic. We see white bacterium and gray bacterium. and antibiotic treatment is applied, we can see that the number of the white ones decrease, whereas the gray ones increase. What can we conclude from that? By day 4, one of the strains of bacteria was able to thrive and continue to reproduce. Which of the following reasons would explain why this took place? None of the bacteria were able to survive the exposure of the antibiotic. Well, that doesn't make sense at all. So we can see that some did survive. Bacteria found a new food source, making them invincible to the antibiotic. There is no new food around here. It's just growing on the same medium. Food is not changing, so that doesn't make sense either. Some of the bacteria already had the genes that made them resistant to antibiotics. To the antibiotic, that makes a lot of sense, so it's probably this answer here. Bacteria can instantly change the DNA. No, they cannot. So yeah, some of the bacteria did already have a gene that made them resistant to the antibiotic. Now we can see that we have very few, or just one bacterium, a small colony of the gray strain, and we can see that it immediately was able to reproduce, did not die off. So we can imply that this bacterium here already contained the antibiotic resistance. Homeostasis refers to the ability of cells or body systems to keep a stable internal environment as the external environment changes. Cells and body systems monitor their internal environment and adjust the internal conditions if a change occurs. The adjustments may be made through a negative feedback system. So what is a negative feedback? A negative feedback system is a process in which an initial change will bring about an additional change in the opposite direction. So, for example, if your body temperature rises because you're exercising, your body will respond to that by sweating eventually. The sweat evaporates, takes away heat from your body, and as a change, the body temperature will decrease again, which is opposing the initial change in the opposite direction, negative feedback. So important to understand in this topic here, negative feedback. Now, often in everyday life, we understand negative feedback as something actually negative. In biology, it just means opposite response, basically. So negative can be translated as opposite of the initial change. So if something goes that way, then the negative of this is that way, or if something goes that way, then the negative of that is going that way. So that's what negative means in this case, and feedback can be translated to response. Positive feedback system is a process in which an initial change will bring about an additional change in the same direction. Positive feedback does not maintain homeostasis. It usually leads to extremes. There are a couple of few examples in organisms where positive feedback is needed or sometimes applied, but for homeostasis, to keep our body systems and our internal environment stable within narrow limits of set points, our body uses negative feedback systems. Which of the following is not an example of a negative feedback system? A person is hungry for a long time, so the person's body metabolism slows down, allowing the body to survive on less food. The kidneys detect a decrease of oxygen in the blood, so they secrete a hormone called erythropoietin that increases the production of red blood cells, which would increase the amount of oxygen in the blood. Again, blood pressure increases, so the brain signals the heart to slow down its rate, reducing blood pressure. So that's an example of negative feedback as well. B and C are obvious examples of negative feedbacks. Proteins are only partially digested, so the digestive system secretes hydrochloric acid and pepsin, speeding up the process. That sounds like it's either A or D. So A is probably negative feedback as well. You're hungry, so your body slows down the metabolism, which means you should be less hungry afterwards. Whereas D, there's some hydrochloric acid and pepsin probably already in the stomach. and they start digesting the food. This is not fast enough, so more hydrochloric acid and pepsin are released, and which makes it faster. So let me think about this one again. Yeah, should be D makes the most sense. This sounds more like positive feedback. It's definitely not negative feedback. Okay, next question is about this illustration here. You can see the different layers of Earth, inner core, outer core, the mantle, and the lithosphere with different layers. We can see the asthenosphere, part of the mantle, lithosphere, the different layers here, the crust, the upper solid mantle, and part of the ductile mantle, the asthenosphere. The liquid part of Earth's surface can be found in the liquid part of Earth's surface. So surface means on top. That should probably be liquid part. So the outer core is liquid. This should be solid here. So it should be the outer core being liquid. Question 1 and 11 and 12 refer to the following chart. We have relationships of the laws of first law of thermodynamics, where U, delta U is the change in internal energy, Q heat exchange, and W is work done. And we get some information here about isobaric process when the pressure is constant. It's called isobaric when the volume remains constant of a substance, or of a gas probably. It's called isochoric. Isothermal means the temperature remains constant. Adiabatic means there's no heat exchange. Based on the chart, choose the correct term for each of the following. So we have two graphs here, graph A, graph B. We can see that in graph A, we have a change going from here to up here. And this change happens in P, which is pressure. We can see that volume remains constant. So we have a change in pressure at a constant volume. Volume constant is called isochoric. So that should be isochoric. Graph B is the opposite. We can see that this pressure value here remains the same. There's no change in it while the volume is changing. Therefore, this is an example of constant pressure called isobaric. During an isothermal process, so now we're talking about this situation here, both, I guess, something and volume, I guess this should be pressure. Pressure and volume change, but temperature is isothermal. Temperature remains constant. Therefore, the change in internal energy is, and now we can look at the first law, the change in internal energy is equal to 0. So we just make use of the information in the table. Question 13 to 16. Conduction. Okay, we're told what these terms here mean. Conduction, the transfer of heat of thermal energy by diffusion and collisions of particles within a substance due to a temperature gradient. By this process, heat is transferred through one substance to another substance when the two substances are in direct contact. For example, heat is transferred to a metal pot placed on a hot burner. Convection, the transfer of heat from one place to another by the movement of fluids. For example, when air heats up, the particles move further apart and become less dense, causing the heated air to rise. Thermal radiation, the transfer of heat by radiation generated by the motion of charged particles. This method of heat transfer does not rely on any contact between the heat source and the heated object. For example, a person's face is warmed by the light radiated from the sun. Heat from a hot cooking pot moves to the pot handle by, this happens in a solid, direct contact, so conduction. Thermal energy from a solar heater is transferred to a person's body. From a solar heater. So since the solar heater is surrounded by air, we probably have convection, and it will emit radiation as well, so it should be both convection and radiation. Thermal energy from a fire moves up through a chimney by, because it's moving up, it's, I guess, convection in this case, could be convection and radiation as well. But we already had that, so I guess it should be convection. Thermal energy in a hot iron is transferred to a shirt by, that should be conduction, again, direct contact. So just let me check the mark scheme for number 15. It does say convection only, so yeah, it's not a very good question, and fire definitely emits radiation as well, but because they're specifically talking about up the chimney, it directly relates to convection currents, which is not that heated air becomes less dense, causing the heated air to rise. Therefore, this really, yeah, it's talking about convection here. Number 17, we are told what endothermic and exothermic reactions are. Endothermic reactions needs to be supplied. They need to be supplied with heat. They absorb heat energy, whereas an exothermic reaction is one that releases heat to the surrounding. In an endothermic reaction, the energy content of the reactants is less than that of the products. One example of an endothermic reaction is cooking an egg. An exothermic reaction, the energy content of the products is more than that of the reactants. Well, in an exothermic reaction, the energy content of the products. This should say less. We will draw something like an energy level diagram. In an endothermic reactions, the reactants have less energy than the products. Therefore, energy is absorbed from the surrounding, usually in the form of heat. So that heat energy is then changed into chemical energy, which is stored in the products. So an exothermic reaction is the opposite. The reactants, we're talking about energy here. This is our axis. The reactants have more energy, and when the reaction takes place, the products will end up with less energy, and the difference in energy is released to the surrounding. So in an exothermic reaction, the energy content stored in the products is less than the energy content in the reactants. So there's a mistake here. One example of an exothermic reaction is a fire, and a fireplace heat is released from the burning of the logs. Consider the following reaction. 4Al plus 3O2 gives 2Al2O3 plus energy. This reaction is an exothermic reaction because heat is released by the reaction. This plus energy tells us that energy comes out at the end, therefore exothermic. According to the law of conservation of energy, energy can neither be created nor be destroyed, only transferred and transformed from one form to another. What kind of energy conversion is taking place when an electric bread toaster is switched on? So the toaster is using electrical energy, electricity, and it produces heat to toast the bread. So therefore, B is the correct answer here. Nuclear energy is obtained by nuclear fission, which is the process of splitting apart uranium atoms in a controlled manner that creates energy. This is quite dangerous because if the chain reaction of splitting the atoms is not controlled very carefully, an atomic explosion could occur. This fission process gives off heat energy, which is used to boil water in a power plant's reactor core. The steam created with this water is used to turn a turbine, generating electricity. Nuclear energy is derived from what? So, nuclear energy is obtained by nuclear fission, which is the process of splitting apart uranium atoms. So therefore, it's not combustion, is fission of U-235 atoms, not fusion, not with the breaking fission. So this is just a close reading question. Question 20. Carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that can be sustained in a given environment at a given point in time. The following graph shows the effect of an overshoot of population on the carrying capacity of an area. So again, what is the carrying capacity? It relates to the maximum number of individuals that our environment or the ecosystem can support. For example, with food or with habitat. So this is our population. So if the population becomes more than the ecosystem can support, this could be in terms of food. This means we have now more organisms. They will eat more food, and therefore they will affect the food source negatively. So negatively that the food source itself might start to struggle and decline, or be so negatively affected that its own population size of the food source decreases dramatically, and that would then lower the carrying capacity, which means for some time the population that overshot will decrease again after some time as well, because it doesn't find enough resources, will die off to a certain smaller population size and then eventually start to rise again, but we can see that in this case the carrying capacity has degraded as well, and that would then only allow fewer individuals to live in the ecosystem than before. And eventually, the carrying capacity may recover again. Which of the following situations best describes the graph? The overshoot of population never reached the carrying capacity. That's not true. We can see that the overshoot definitely went above the carrying capacity. The overshoot of population had no effect on the carrying capacity. That's not true. We can see that the overshoot of the population caused a degradation in the carrying capacity. The population never stopped increasing even after the carrying capacity was reached. That's not true. We can see after some time it has overshot. It decreases again. So let's not see the overshoot of population caused the carrying capacity to decrease. That is correct. We can see after the overshoot the carrying capacity itself decreased. So correct answer here is D. The wave equation states the mathematical relationship between the speed v of a wave and its wavelength lambda and frequency f. Speed equals wavelength times frequency, or v equals lambda times f. A sound source sends waves of 400 Hertz, which is frequency. So that's probably something you should know. The unit of frequency is Hertz. Hertz means per second, or in this case, the waves per second. So if we translate that unit, that unit is the same as 1 over s per second. Something happens per second in terms of waves, the number of waves that pass a specific point every second. So if we have 400 Hertz and we look at a specific point, then every second 400 waves move through that point. That's the frequency. It produces waves of wavelength 2.5 meter. And the velocity of the, what is the velocity of the sound wave? 2.5 times 400. That is 1000. 2 times 400 is 800. Half of 400 is 200. So 800 plus 200 is 1000. Electromagnetic waves are produced by the vibration of charged particles and do not require a medium through which to travel. The electromagnetic spectrum is divided into several regions based on frequencies, wavelengths, and other characteristics. The shorter the wavelength of a wave, the greater its energy. That's probably something important. The shorter the wavelength of the wave, the greater its energy. Gamma rays have the shortest wavelength and most energy. Gamma rays, shortest wavelength, most energy of any wave in the electromagnetic spectrum. These waves are generated by radioactive atoms and in nuclear explosions. X-rays have shorter wavelength and therefore higher energy than ultraviolet waves. So X-rays have more energy than ultraviolet light. Gamma rays are the ones that have the highest energy. Ultraviolet light has a shorter wavelength than visible light. Visible lights waves are the only electromagnetic waves that can be seen by our eyes. Each color has a different wavelength. Red has the longest wavelength, which means lowest energy, and violet has the shortest wavelength, which means greater energy. Infrared lies between the visible light and microwaves. And microwave portions of the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio waves have the longest wavelength in the electromagnetic spectrum. So yeah, this is just following some figuring out an order here in this bit chaotic way that this is written here. So radio waves have the longest wavelength, which means one must be radio, and therefore we can immediately exclude C and D. So it's either A or B. Then comes infrared, and then we've learned comes the visible light, going from red to violet. Then comes the visible light, then comes the UV light, ultraviolet light, and then come the X rays. So 1 radio, 2 visible, 3 ultraviolet, 4 X-rays. The following is a chart of information recorded over a period of 10 years. It shows the relationship between a predator, a tiger population, and a prey, a deer population. So from 2001 to 2010, the numbers of deers from here to here, they have increased. Then from here to here, they have decreased. And we can see then from here to here, they increase again, and then they start to decrease again. For our tigers, we see that we have in this period increase 2, then in that period decrease 2, then in this period increase 2, and in this period a decrease 2. So we can see that the two are the two population sizes depend on each other. The number of predators increases as the number of prey increases. That makes sense. No? So as prey increase, predators increase. 2 prey doesn't approach 0, just goes down to 90. That's not approaching 0. Stays the same is not true as well. Now we can see the tiger population. It's always changing too. The following graph shows the extinction of species and the increase in human population. So human population is in gray, we can see that it rises, and extinction of species is in black, and we can see that the two seem to correlate with each other. The extinction of species is directly proportional to the increase in the human population. That is correct. As one goes up, the other goes up too. That is a directly proportional relationship. A group of cells working together is called a tissue. The human body contains 4 main types of tissues: epithelial cells that cover and protect underlying tissues, nervous tissue cells that carry nerve signals, muscle tissue cells that contract and relax to move the skeletal parts of the functioning the functioning organs, connective tissue cells that join, support, cushion, and nourish organs. Indicate the correct box where each of the following belongs. So let's number these: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this implies some knowledge. Biceps is a muscle, so that must be muscle tissue. The skin covers and protects underlying tissues, so it's epithelial tissue. Cartilage is the tissue that joins and cushions our bones, so therefore it's connective tissue. Brain cells are obviously nerve cells. Ligaments, similar to cartilage. Ligaments join muscles to bones, so it's connective tissue. And cardiac muscle, as it says, is muscle tissue. So that is the correct order. 26. Newton's second law states that the acceleration of an object depends on the object's mass and the amount of force applied to the object. Therefore, acceleration is equal to force over mass. Acceleration is the rate of change of velocity of an object. Therefore, acceleration is equal to velocity over time. So 2 formulas for acceleration. The unit of acceleration is meters per second square. The unit of force is in Newton, and 1 Newton is equal to kilogram meter per second square. Any object usually has more than one force acting on it at any time. For example, a driving force, air resistance, and friction. If we look at a car, if 2 forces are acting in the opposite direction, then the difference between those two forces gives the resultant force. What is the acceleration of a car with a mass of 1000 kilogram if the driving force is 3600 Newton and friction and air resistance is combined to 800 Newton? So if this is our car here, as represented as a block, then the driving force is moving in this direction, so the driving force goes that way with 3600 Newton, and air resistance obviously acts against that, which is 800 Newton, and friction. So we are told that the resultant force is the difference. So the resultant force is this vector minus that vector, so 3600 minus 800 is equal to 2800, so that is the resultant force going in that direction, 2800 Newton, which will cause the car to accelerate. Then we know that acceleration is equal to force over mass, so we use the first formula here, and in this formula, force is always the resultant force up here, so 2800 divided by 1000 kilogram, that's the mass of the car. And we know as well, they told us that Newton is equal to kilogram meter per second. So if we divide this by kilogram, you can see that the kilogram cancels out and we are left with a unit for acceleration. So that would be equal to 2.8 meters per second square. And that is answer A. Water and other substances enter the cell through diffusion. Diffusion is the process of flow of a substance from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. The cells in the root of the plant are responsible for the diffusion of water from the soil into the cell, which is then transported up the plant. To show this, an experiment was conducted in which a white flower was placed in water mixed with red coloring. After a few hours, it was observed that red streaks started appearing in the flower. For water to flow into the flower cells, the concentration of water in the cells must be lower or less than the concentration of water in the container. Water or diffusion is defined as flow of substance from higher concentration to lower concentration. Renewable energy resources are sources of power that quickly replenish themselves and can be used again and again. Similarly, non-renewable resources are those sources of power that cannot be used over and over again. So they use up and they take very, very, very long time to be replenished, often millions of years. Indicate the correct box where each of the following energy sources belongs. So again, we can number this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Solar is renewable, unlimited supply basically, same as wind. Coal is non-renewable. Geothermal is renewable. It's heat from the Earth's mantle or core, or from below ground. For 5 is oil, crude oil, which is non-renewable. Wood can be grown relatively fast enough to be counted as renewable. While working on a cladistics project, students learned that the first amniotic egg evolved approximately 340 million years ago in ancestral reptiles. The evolution of the amniotic egg allowed reptiles to expand into drier terrestrial habitats. The students represented this and other information they learned with a cladogram, as shown below. Wherever we have traits before an intersection, like here, so B is a shared trait between reptiles and birds and mammals. A is a trait that is shared by amphibians, reptiles, and birds. D is a trait that only birds have. C is a trait that only mammals have. Based on the information above on the cladogram, which point corresponds with the appearance of the amniotic egg? That must be point B, because we were told that reptiles were the first to have the amniotic eggs, so we can see if it evolved here, or ancestors of reptiles, birds, and mammals. So therefore all of these have amniotic eggs. It evolved after the split in the ancestors of amphibians that are alive today and the reptiles, birds, and mammals that are alive today. Therefore amphibians do not have amniotic eggs, and it must be point B. Meiosis is the type of cell division in which the parent cell divides to form 4 daughter cells, each of which has half as many chromosomes as the parent cell. Mitosis is the type of cell division in which the parent cell divides to produce 2 identical daughter cells with the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell. During meiosis, a parent cell with a certain number of chromosomes divides to produce daughter cells with half that number of chromosomes, so the only numbers that make sense here are 46 and 23. 23 is half of 46, 4 daughter cells, half as many chromosomes as the parent cell. Compared to their parent cells, the cells resulting from mitosis each have the same DNA. They are identical. An atom in the smallest is the smallest possible particle of a substance and is made up of 3 particles: protons, electrons, and neutrons. Protons have a positive charge, protons positive, electrons have a negative charge, neutrons have no charge, they are neutral. That's where the name comes from. The atomic mass of an element is the total of the number of protons and neutrons. Together, the atomic number is equal to the number of protons in the nucleus of an atom and determines the identity of the element. There's a lot of information here in this short bit. Some very, very basic information from chemistry that you should know, so this shouldn't be new for you. Iron has an atomic number of 26 and atomic mass of 56. Which of the following correctly describes the nucleus of an iron atom? So we were just told the atomic number is equal to the number of protons. So therefore, our iron atom with an atomic number of 26 must have 26 protons, so we can exclude C and D. We were told as well that the atomic mass of an element is the total, the sum of protons and neutrons, and therefore the number of neutrons must be mass minus protons, gives us neutrons. Why? Because the mass is neutrons plus protons, so to get the number of neutrons we need to subtract the number of protons from that to get the neutrons. P plus n minus p is n, number of neutrons. So 56 minus 26 is 30, so the correct answer is A. Physical properties. A physical property is an aspect of a substance that can be observed or measured without changing the identity of the substance. Chemical properties. Chemical property is an aspect of a substance that can be observed only during a chemical reaction that alters the substance's chemical identity and produces one or more new substances. Chemical and physical properties are thus related to chemical and physical changes of matter. Indicate the correct box where each of the following belongs. So we number again: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The molecular weight is a physical property. Oxidation, chemical, temperature, physical, melting point, physical, momentum, physical, acidity, probably chemical, rusting, chemical as well, it changes. So acids, bases, the acidity can be observed during a reaction. Freezing of water into ice is an example of a physical change. Now, the identity of the substance remains the same. It's only a change of state. From liquid to solid, the water is still water. H2O remains H2O. Following diagram represents the bright line spectra of 4 individual elements and the bright line spectrum that is produced when 3 of these 4 elements are mixed together. So we have A, D, X, and Z and the mixture. Which element is not present in the mixture? So all that we need to do is we have to look where do lines not overlap. And we can see that these 2 lines are missing here. We can see that this does not exactly overlap, and whereas the other elements, this overlaps, so all of these lines overlap for Z. For D, all lines are overlapping as well. And for A, we can see all lines are overlapping too. This overlaps and this overlaps. So the element that is not present is element X. It's not present in the mixture. In humans, a dark hair color, big D, is dominant over light hair color, small d. So that means dark D is the dominant trait and light hair, small d, is the recessive trait. Now, so in questions like this, I would always write this information down, organize the information. If the X cell of a blonde female who carries only the genes for light colored hair, so that's our blonde person, is fertilized by a sperm cell of a male who carries only the genes for dark hair. So the male has only dark hair genes. What are the chances that the offspring will have dark hair? So we can make a Punnett square for this. We put the gametes of one parent on top and the gametes of the other parent on the side, and we can see that all outcomes will be heterozygous, big D, small d, and that combination is 100% dark hair. So correct answer is A. 37 mountains are formed when tectonic plates lift and tilt over as a result of grinding against each other. These gigantic movements and shifts cause collisions and crumbling of Earth's crust and in turn form mountains. Which of the following is not a cause of mountain formation? Tectonic plate shifts, volcanic action, global warming, tectonic plate collisions. So A and D are about tectonic plates moving. We were just told that this causes mountains. Volcanic action can cause mountains as well, usually underwater mountains, forming islands, like the Hawaii Islands, for example. And global warming has nothing to do with mountain formation. Mutation is a change in a chromosome that in some way alters the genetic message conveyed by that gene. Which of the following is a likely outcome of a mutation? A change in the chromosome. A mutation is a change in the DNA of the chromosome that in some way alters the genetic, changes the genetic message which is conveyed by the gene. Outcome of a mutation, alteration in the number of chromosomes of the gene. That doesn't really make sense. Change in the lifespan of the organism, change in the physical appearance of the organisms, increased rate of cell division, which is a likely outcome of a mutation. Probably C, for example, dark hair color. If there's a mutation in the dark hair gene, it could lead to the formation of a new hair color like light hair, which means a change in the physical appearance of the organism. And the last two questions. In a solution, two or more substances are joined in a homogeneous mixture with generally uniform physical properties. In such a mixture, a solute is a substance that dissolves in another substance known as the solvent. The ability of one substance to dissolve in another substance is called solubility. So, very important definitions here. So again, this requires close reading. A basic principle of solution says that like dissolves like. The overall solvation capacity of a solvent depends primarily on its polarity. Polar molecules are those that have an uneven distribution of electrons, whereas non-polar molecules are those that have an even distribution of electrons. Polar or ionic solvents dissolve polar or ionic solutes, and nonpolar solvents dissolve nonpolar solutes. For example, water is a polar solvent, H2O, a water molecule, which looks a bit like this. It's an uneven distribution of electrons towards the oxygen, therefore the oxygen is slightly negative, whereas the hydrogens are slightly positive, therefore a water molecule is polar. So it's a polar solvent, and it will dissolve salts, because salts are ionic compounds and other polar molecules. No, salts are ionic compounds, like NaCl, for example, is made of sodium ions Na+, and chloride ions Cl-. So since they have a charge, they dissolve in polar solvents. But non-polar molecules like oil. So, for example, water is a polar solvent, and it will dissolve salts and other polar molecules, but not non-polar molecules like oil. We know that oil and water don't mix. Petroleum is a non-polar solvent and will dissolve in oil, but it will not mix with water. The substance that is more likely to dissolve in water is, or we just said that, NaCl is a salt, therefore it will dissolve. I2, solid I2 is an element. Elements are usually non-polar. So an I2 molecule like this has an even distribution of electrons, so it's non-polar. Same with oxygen gas, O2. Two oxygen atoms bonded together by a covalent double bond. Electrons are distributed evenly between the two, so non-polar. Proteins are usually very, very large molecules, so they're usually, because of their size, insoluble. Tectonic plates vary in density. When pressure between an oceanic plate and continental plate builds up, subduction can occur. When this occurs, the something plate is subducted because it is the lighter or denser of the two plates. So tectonic plates vary in density. The pressure between an oceanic plate and a continental plate builds up. When pressure builds up, subduction occurs. Subduction means moving below. So that probably has to do with density, and it's usually the oceanic plate is probably more dense than the continental plate, so the oceanic plate moves below the continental plate, so the oceanic plate has a higher, because it's the denser of the two plates. Moves below. You know that higher density usually sits below lower density, like if you mix oil and water, relating to the questions. On top, water has a greater density than oil, so we get two layers with oil on top and water below, because water has a higher density. The oceanic plate has a higher density, so it gets subducted below the continental plate. Now here we have the ocean. Here we have the ocean floor. The oceanic plate moves below the continental plate. Subduction. All right, that was the practice test. I hope you learned something new. I hope I could help you prepare for your upcoming GED test. And I wish you all the best for your upcoming GED science test. and hope you get a pass and a good score. Until then, see you in the next screencast.